All right, welcome back to the second lecture of week 2, and this lecture is hoof anatomy. And, we devote, the next 3 lectures really just focusing in on the hoof because it is so critical to their care that, it's really worthwhile to pay attention to these lectures and hopefully give you some tips. So, it's really important to maintain a horse's hoof, and, it's really critical to their ability to move. So if you're competing with this horse or any type of activity, if something's wrong with their feet, they're not going to be able to go anywhere. And it's really critical to their health and well-being, because the old adage or the old saying is, no hoof, no horse. And, I'm going to use Barbaro as an example, and we're going to get into much more detail when we get into the laminitis talk. Barbaro is a story that happened in 2006 in the United States. He had won the Kentucky Derby, spectacular horse. People really thought he was the next great chance for a Triple Crown. In the initial stretch of the Preakness Stakes, he breaks his hind right leg. And what happened was his hind right leg healed fine. It's just he started going laminitic in all the rest of his feet. And so that's what really led to his demise, and he was euthanized in January of 2007. So, that's what directly caused him to no longer be able to live. He had no feet. Now, looking at anatomy, we're going to start on the outside and work our way in. And the first portion is just this outer hoof portion. And this is what we call insensitive or epidermal tissue. Now, it's insensitive because it doesn't have the nerve structure or really a lot of blood flowing in those areas. And I like to tell students that it's almost like your long fingernails. We clip our long fingernails all the time, and we don't feel anything, as long as it's the dead portion or the outgrowth portion, which is very similar to the horse. So that's why we're able to put on nail shoes on or trim their feet, and they feel no discomfort whatsoever. Now, the bottom of the hoof anatomy is really, really important to know different structures. So it's worthwhile to review this slide in detail. If you ever get in discussions with a farrier or your veterinarian, you need to know, what he or she's referencing to. Now, just looking at the external part, divide the hoof into really 3 parts. And the first portion is called the toe. So you can see here, the next portion's the quarters, and then this final portion is what we call the heel. So we'll say heel, quarters, toe in reference to that. Now, just going around, this right here, which I'll highlight in later slides too, is called the frog. We'll talk about that. Here's the bars of the frog in here. Most of this area, is the sole. So you're looking at, all the way through here is really the concave portion of the hoof. And then this outer portion, or the hoof wall, is really going all the way around. And we'll talk about that too, especially when we talk about hoof care. But that's where the horse rests, or should be resting most of their weight. They shouldn't be resting weight on the sole or the frog. That outer wall should really be the part that's protruding down. So, and we'll get to that when we talk about hoof care. Now, on this slide, I just put up the bottom of a hoof and just wanted to see if you could identify some structures on your own. So you can pause the video and try to go back through that and just compare it, to an actual hoof that on this slide and to the previous one with all the different structures, and see if you can find them on that. Now, one portion I did not talk about in the previous slide is this area that you can kind of see starting right here, and it goes all the way around, and that's going to help lead us into, talking about the internal structure, but that's called the white line. And the white line is where you get, the inner hoof wall combining with the outer hoof wall. Now, the coronary band is this region right here, which you can see at the top of this hoof. Okay, and that's almost like our nail bed. So that's where the hoof grows out. So starting from there, growing down is where the hoof kind of originates. So if we look at our own nail beds, that's kind of very similar to the coronary band. Now, it's important to remember if this gets injured, or, sometimes horses can clip their hooves when, exercising or whatnot, that can slow down or stop growth. So you always want to be careful if you do have a horse that has an injury there, to have a veterinarian or a farrier look at that area. Now, things that can affect hoof growth, you can see the list there, and the 2 that I'll highlight is nutrition. And we know through research that, hoof growth definitely has is affected by nutrition. And what we mean is horses that have a higher plane in nutrition, or they have diets that are just higher in nutrients, they're going to have better hoof growth. And so there are a bunch of supplements in different markets throughout the world that sells hoof promotants, and you know, some of these have research, some of these don't, but you know, the general knowledge, or the general rule of thumb is better nutrients equal better hoof growth. And then the other one I'll highlight really quickly too is the environment. In dry areas of the world, or when it's dry times of the year, hoof growth is actually going to slow down. And then during more of wet, you know, spring season or rainy season, those hooves are going to grow a little bit faster. Now, on average, a horse is going to grow, the hoof's going to grow about 1/4 to 1/2 inch per month. So it takes anywhere from 9 months to a year for a horse to fully grow out their hooves. Now, the other structure I really wanted to address on the outer hoof wall is this frog region, which you can see it outlined there. It's a little off center, but that's on purpose so you can visualize that. And the frog is the area of the hoof that is, I guess if you said anywhere area was sensitive, it would be the frog. Now there isn't nerves running through there, but it's the softer portion of the outer hoof. So it's made up of approximately 50% moisture. And that's important because it really helps the hoof expand when they strike the ground. So it's almost the shock absorber, and it gives that hoof a little bit of its elasticity. So when a horse hits the ground, that hoof actually kind of compresses and spreads out. And that's why you know, the frog with that moisture content can kind of do that. So, and when we get to talking about hoof care, we'll address the frog a little bit more, you know, on being careful trimming the frog, because you can injure him if you overdo it. Now, going from the outside to the inside, you know, the inside we call the sensitive tissue, or the dermal layer, and you can see, you know, that looks like that's pretty painful, you know, and obviously that's a horse that was euthanized at some point. But you can see the rich blood supply, and when we call it sensitive, that also means there's a lot of nerves there. So again, like the bottom of our nail bed, anybody that's accidentally clipped their nails too short or pulled a nail, it's extremely painful. Well, that's because of all the nerves that are in there, and very similar to a horse's hooves, you know, that internal tissue. Now, I referenced the white line earlier, and if you looked at, you know, going from the external tissue to the internal tissue, it would be this region right here. So you're looking at the portion where the outer hoof wall is attaching to the inner hoof, and that's through this laminar interface. So they have these interlocking fingers that actually are really tight, even down at the microscopic level, and they keep everything in place. Now, also important with this laminar interface is it attaches to the coffin bone. So it keeps the coffin bone locked in at its proper angle, and it just really holds the entire hoof structure together. Now, speaking of bones, these are the 3 bones that make up the hoof wall. So we start at the short pastern, or we call it the P2, or second phalanx, and then we have the navicular bone here, and then we have the coffin bone. So these are the bones that make up the hoof. Now, this long pastern bone is actually P1, or the first phalanx, and so that's really not part of the hoof, but that's coming down, you know, from the fetlock down to the pastern. Now, I'm only going to talk about 2 tendons, and before I do that, understand that tendons is the portion of the connective tissue that connects a muscle to a bone, whereas ligaments attach bone to bone. So we talk about 2 really important tendons that are important in the hoof, and the first is the deep digital flexor tendon, or the DDFT, and that attaches to the back of the coffin bone here. So we're looking right down here, and actually it's up here where it attaches to the deep digital flexor muscle. Now, when that muscle contracts, so when we contract the muscle, we actually shorten it. Okay, so you can imagine that's going to pull this tendon up, and this hoof is going to flex. So it flexes back. Okay, so it pulls it back. That's flexing. And that's from the deep digital flexor tendon. Now, the other one is the common digital extensor tendon. And so if you imagine up here, the common digital extensor muscle actually contracts, so it shortens and pulls up on this, and so the hoof is going to extend. So extends out. And that's how those two tendons work. Now there's other tendons running in there, and there, you know, the suspensory ligament and other things that are in part of leg anatomy that are important because horses do get injuries there. But so just be aware that there are a lot of tendons and ligaments in there keeping all the structures together, but these are the two that I just wanted to highlight. And then the final slide kind of talking about hoof anatomy, and this will get important especially when we start talking about laminitis, is there's a really rich blood supply running down to the hoof. So you can see the many blood vessels running through there, and it's really critical that helps those tissues, you know, grow and sustain themselves and grow the hoof. So when we get to laminitis, we'll talk about the importance of that a little bit more in a couple lectures. So next, we're going to jump into hoof care. So I'll see you then.